So this is obviously a conceived example. But so on the line 40 here, we have a situation where maybe you have a boss and the boss has a few targets. Maybe it's like minions or projectiles that the player is sending out. And we need to go into the for each loop on line 46. And in the player logic, we need to like work with the boss targets. So you have like a situation where two entities data is involved in the same situation, sort of. So you can see there, I'm doing something on like line 56. I'm reading the target 0 and just putting it somewhere. Imagine something happening where the player needs to understand what the boss is targeting or something. If I do this, because I pick out a dynamic buffer, which is an array that you can associate with an entity. For those who doesn't know, so you can have I guess we shouldn't go that much into basics, but if you pick out this array on line 40, and you have like read only or write, true or false, it doesn't matter. If you pick out, and then because you're jumping into something doing anything that Unity considers or ECS considered might change the structure of things. So that means that when you're trying to access it on line 56, you will get you cannot access this because it's been invalidated by possible structural changes. The thing is that you don't really care if it's structural change or not, because your target list will not have changed either way. You just want to know the target list.
Right.
But Unity has, they have requirements on their memory safety. So this and this is not strictly exactly all the time you get errors like this, but generally speaking, if you pick up a dynamic buffer and you're trying to use it just like it is, along with working with other entities or other like adding, removing, or just modifying components, you will get like, no, you cannot do this because we might have changed something in the background. So the trick to do this is if you uncomment 40 and then comment take back 42. So now you can see we do two native array with temp allocator. And the allocator could you be using different one depending on what you're using with it, but you just the easiest way to solve this is to use that extension, because that makes a copy of that array and put it, so you don't actually access the source data in the dynamic buffer anymore. You just access your local copy of it, and that is like zero backsides to it except for a slight copy, but it's super fast and you can do whatever you want with that array after that. And it's just whenever you're working with dynamic buffers and you're not explicitly working with just that entity, so you should, like in my case, in my experience, you should not almost always just make a copy of it into a normal native array that is just standalone, and just work with that instead of the dynamic buffer original source data, because Unity will be very annoyed at you anytime you touch anything. Like, no, you need to put, you can't touch this again.
Right.
Yeah. So it cleans up some type of code a lot if you just do a copy of it, and then you can put it back if you modify it. It's no problem. But now you just have a copy. Yeah. And I guess we could maybe expand on it one further, because if we look at the boss targets component, you can just go, it's slightly further up. You have like a boss targets there. Yeah, you see it's just an entity. So in that case, that's a pretty normal situation where you just have a list of entities.
You're just keeping track of one thing. Yeah.
Exactly. So then if you go back down and you see, we look on line 52 and on 56. First one you have there, I'm doing something with a target. I'm setting some gameplay state on it, right? And then on 56, I'm doing the thing we talked about earlier. I'm reading from it again. And I think both of these will make exception if you depending on situations. But But we need to do the point entity thing all the time, and that's not a big deal, but it can be simplified slightly because we only have a straight up one entity inside of the buffer element. So if you the comment 42 and then uncomment 44, then we and this both the reinterpret and to native array can be switched around. I don't think it matters which way, but the reinterpret, which is an overloading, which is something that's you get the same array back. They don't do anything. They don't do a copy or anything. It's just like, okay, we got this memory, but if we just view it through a different type scope and like, oh, this isn't boss targets anymore. It's just straight up an entity. And if boss targets only contains entities straight up, it's the same memory. It doesn't matter. It's just exactly the same layout. So now if you see you have an error now on 46, and that's because entity, you can just remove the entities on both 52 and 56. So if you remove that now and that one other, because targets now, if you hold over it, targets is just a straight up
native array of entity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but you need to be careful so you know that you reinterpret the array into the same thing, sort of fundamentally. But this way, and I use this reinterpret entity all the time in my game because it's just easier to know that this is just straight up an entity array. And then you can reinterpret it back into boss targets and put it back into if you modify it. So reinterpret is very, very handy to make that kind of code much cleaner.
So do you use reinterpret on the native array, and then that's how you can get the like a dynamic buffer back? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. I just do if you try after the run here and just put targets dot reinterpret boss targets, and then you can put that straight into anything.
Nice.
So that's just a straight native array with boss targets in, and it's the same thing. It's the identical memory.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah. So yeah, that was my quick tip. I had like a year of dots programming before I realized the first one, and working with dynamic buffers is so annoying unless you work with the copy of it all the time.
Yeah. They're handy, and but yeah, I think these are definitely helpful things to use. Admittedly, the reinterpret one I had used this like a long time ago, but I haven't really been using it too much recently. So now that you remind me of it, I'll have to probably. I'm already thinking of a couple places that I can use this for some things. So
Yeah, and it's not that much you can do with it except for this one. But this one is really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.